Hello there and welcome to our special coverage of Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil. I'm Li Dongning in Beijing.
And I'm Pandong. President Xi Jinping and his Brazilian counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva are meeting at the presidential residence in Brasilia. Before the bilateral meeting, President Lula da Silva held a welcome ceremony for the visiting president of the People's Republic of China.
Right, and again, two guests are joining us in the studio to provide insightful analysis on how this visit could deepen the China-Brazil comprehensive strategic partnership and also bolster cooperation. They're business and technology author Edgar Perez and Professor Huang Jing from the Shanghai International Studies University. Welcome to our special coverage, gentlemen. Well, to start off, Chinese President Xi Jinping and Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva have held small group and large group talks. Before the bilateral meeting, President Lula held an official welcome ceremony for the visiting Chinese president. Xi Jinping's state visit comes after attending the 19th G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, and this trip is his fifth visit to Brazil. President Xi had a signed article published in the Brazilian media where he described the country as a passionate land, noting that Brazil is the first country to establish a strategic partnership with China. President Xi said the bilateral relationship has always been a forerunner in the relations between China and fellow developing nations. And this year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment of their diplomatic ties. President Xi said he believes his visit will usher bilateral ties into a new golden 50 years.
Now, for more on that, let's cross live to our reporter Chen Ziyuan in Brasilia. Hello, Ziyuan. You've been following this very closely. Bring us up to date.
So, Pandong, I was actually in the Alvarado Palace this morning, and a young journalist here put it this way: it seems like to be a big party between China and Brazil for the 50 years of friendship. Especially, the journalists are very paying attention to the events on the ground. Let me begin with what I've seen in the palace. President Xi Jinping arrived on his motorcade with the Brazilian armies standing on the side of the roads to salute to his arrival. Meanwhile, I want to share with you a song was performed, My Motherland, at the welcoming ceremony to really showcase that the welcoming and also the warm-hearted atmosphere that Brazilian President Lula wanted to show his guests at the Alvarado Palace. Meanwhile, I talked to some of the reporters covering the event on the ground. They say that in 2019 the event was at the government building here, but it's moved to Lula's residency. So this is another gesture to show that President Lula is really paying his heart to this visit by President Xi, and that's the event on the ground. Back to in studio, Pandong.
Right, and Ziyuan, apart from the grand welcome ceremony, what else can we expect for today?
Well, you just mentioned that they met during the large group and also small group meeting. So what we're expecting to see is actually the outcome of the bilateral talks. We're going to see and witness the signing and exchange of cooperation documents. And the two presidents will be meeting with the press after the document being exchanged. What we're also will be seeing is the welcoming banquet that President Lula will be holding for President Xi. And also in the afternoon, we will be hearing more from the officials about the outcome of this visit. What we're expecting to see here is that lots of media colleagues that I've talked to, they say they really want to see what will it be for China and Brazil in the new phase of the good friendship between the two countries. Back to in studio, Dongning.
All right, thank you very much, Chen Ziyuan, reporting from Brasilia.
Now, our correspondent Dan Williams has more on the expectations on this crucial bilateral meeting between Chinese President Xi Jinping and his Brazilian counterpart Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva.
These bilateral talks between China and Brazil have been highly anticipated, and of course there's always a great deal of focus and speculation as to what will come out of this, what announcements will potentially be made following these bilateral talks. And although that's unclear. What is clear is that these two presidents, President Xi, President Lula, appear very much aligned with their world visions, and certainly from the G20 and some of the talks and some of the statements that were made there, we can potentially expect some announcements around further sustainable greener economy and energy solutions. We may also see more action towards poverty alleviation, which was those two themes very much key from the G20. We also know as well that Xi Jinping, ahead of this trip to Brazil, talked about, this is his 5th trip to Brazil, talked again as well about his love of the country, but also talking about how this relationship has continued to progress over the years, talking about the mutual benefits the two countries have enjoyed, and saying that the two countries enjoy similar or identical international and regional viewpoints on various different issues as well. But of course, we also know about the trade element too. This partnership between Brazil and China is seemingly gaining in strength. We know that bilateral trade is worth more than $181 billion per year, and we know that that is growing, and we can potentially see that being reflected in the jobs and the two different economies and how that has progressed over the years as well. Also in that article that Xi Jinping wrote ahead of his trip here, he also talked about how he hopes that there's a future golden 50 years moving forward. So I think it's safe to say that these bilateral talks is not just a reflection of the journey that these two countries have taken up to this point, and the way that these two countries are seemingly gaining closer and closer, but it's also very much with one eye on the future as well. Dan Williams, CGTN, Brasilia.
Well, this year marks the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations between China and Brazil, and bilateral ties between two of the world's biggest emerging economies continue to flourish.
Brazil, the largest country in South America, is a land of vibrant culture, rich biodiversity and a booming economy. Known for its natural wonders like the Amazon rainforest and its lively carnival, Brazil also stands as a powerful force in global trade and diplomacy. China is Brazil's largest trading partner, with trade between the two nations reaching new heights each year. Brazil exports vast amounts of soybeans, iron ore and oil to China, fueling China's massive industrial economy. In turn, Brazil imports technology, machinery and electronics, creating a mutually beneficial exchange. China and Brazil have strengthened their collaboration through the BRICS group of emerging economies. The two countries have cooperation agreements in IT, biotech, agriculture, aquaculture and healthcare. In the aerospace sector, the China-Brazil Earth Resources Satellite Project has jointly launched 6 satellites so far. The two sides also have dynamic cultural and people-to-people exchanges. Since February 2024, China and Brazil have agreed to grant 10-year visas for each other's citizens for business, leisure trips and family visits. With shared interests in sustainable development, Brazil and China are forging a partnership that shapes the future of international relations.
Right now, let's bring in our guests for more discussions. Well, Mr. Huang, before the outcomes of the talks between the two national leaders, President Xi and President Lula da Silva, comes out, what do you think might be the biggest concerns that the two leaders would touch upon?
Of course, one of the biggest concerns of the two leaders is bilateral relationship, how to promote further this kind of friendship and the trade and the cooperation so benefit both countries. But on the larger issues, I think the two leaders also align themselves together. I think it's very much close on the views of what's happening in today's world, especially on some critical issues regarding peace and stability in our world. I think two countries or two leaders are very much share the view that the war has to be stopped, peace has to be maintained, and also multilateralism has to be upheld in global affairs. And other than that, I think they're going to together promote the interests and the agenda of global South, because both Brazil and China are important members of Global South. And we have also, don't forget, the financial sectors, because as major membership countries of BRICS, they have discussed on BRICS how to create a kind of payment system which will promote further the interest of BRICS countries.
What's your take on this, Mr. Perez?
Well, I think when you think about evolving the trade relationship, the article before mentioned that indeed China is basically exporting technology, computers, 5G technology, and Brazil is exporting raw materials, agricultural products, fishing, mining, and so on. I think this type of trading relation is not sustainable. Eventually, it's going to change. So obviously, China's support to Brazil's industrialization process will mean that in the future, this is going to be a more equilibrated relationship, where Brazil is also going to incorporate some of the advancements in technology that China can provide to Brazil. So I think this relationship is definitely going to expand. And for that, of course, you have to think about tariffs. That's something that has to be reduced in both sides. You also think about regulation. That has to be also similar in both countries. And ultimately, that's going to lead to this development of the growth potential.
Right. China and Brazil relations is really a typical model, a very good example of how multilateralism should work, not only relations between two countries, but of two regions, Latin America and Asia as well. But as the world moves towards multipolarity, no matter we like it or not, it is happening. What challenges do you think countries like China and Brazil, again, China is the second largest economy in the world, and Brazil is the biggest economy in Latin America. What do you think, what challenges do you think the two countries are facing in terms of ensuring a balanced equity, a balanced world order?
Well, if you think about the world overall, consider the economies that are growing the fastest. These economies are really growing, for example, in Africa and the Middle East. So when you think about evolving your opportunities in commerce in the world, that's the type of countries that you need to focus on. So while it's true that the global markets in the Western world actually created a lot of potential in the last decades, the potential for growth in the future for those economies is not as high as in these other parts in the world like Latin America or Africa. That's the global South, and that's where you have two leaders countries like Brazil and China.
And talking about issues in global governance, that's also a key sector. The two countries, China and Brazil, have been working closely together for quite a long time. And talking about latest outcome from the G20 summit in Rio de Janeiro, which also the two presidents attended, and of course Brazil is the host this time. The Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, and it was officially launched at this time's G20 summit. Why these two topics for this crucial statement, this crucial item on the agenda of Brazil as the host?
We know the G20 was first being kind of playing an important role in 2008. At that time, we have this so-called global financial crisis. After that, more and more, especially in the past 2 or 3 G20s, the agenda of global South has been more and more important in G20s. We know that the fundamentals in the human rights is that we have to have enough food to eat, and we have a kind of fair life, a good life to live, so that to overcome the challenges of hunger, the challenges of poverty is the most important challenge, task for the global South countries. I think countries like China and Brazil have to step up in this regard. And another issue that both countries have to really take a larger responsibility is how to maintain peace and stability. We know that's a necessary condition for economic development, given the political uncertainty created by the wars and other issues. I think that the two countries, like the G20 shows, will step up and will play a bigger role, and that will shoulder bigger responsibilities in that regard.
One of the biggest uncertainties in the world we're facing is disruption of supply chains, right? No matter agricultural or industrial. So with that happening more frequent, how can China and Brazil collaborate to create a comparatively more resilient and inclusive global supply chain? Edgar.
Well, when you think about supply chains, you want to make sure that you think about securing that access to resources, like, for example, food. I mean, both countries are very strong in the commitment to actually ensure food security for their citizens. And I think that's something that is going to be particularly important because Brazil and Latin America overall are very important suppliers of this type of resources for the whole world. So the strengthening the relationship between Brazil and China definitely are conducive to that particular goal.
And talking about China's stance on this, earlier we mentioned a booming trade momentum and also talking about the structure of the current trade between China and Brazil. Now, looking ahead, we've seen very clearly that the Chinese government has been encouraging enterprises to invest to the destination country. Not only about Brazil, but as Mr. Perez just mentioned, Chinese investment has been increasing significantly to Brazil. Mr. Huang, so is this a bigger vote of confidence in the potential of the Brazilian market?
Yes, I think that this kind of increase of investment by China or by Brazil into each other, especially by China into Brazil, is first based on a strategic trust that both countries realize and believe that what they're doing is a benefit for both countries. And having said that, the investment is also a starting point for develop a more resilient supply chains, which some major powers, for their own interest, try to cut off, so-called, protectionism, and moreover, based on that, the increased investment is that kind of more exchanges overall in all the economic areas, trade, like mutual beneficial trade, and also economic exchanges in other areas, and also exchanges on high techs and others, just like mentioned, even in the space industry and so forth. I think all of that, of course, started with mutual trust.
And earlier we talked about mechanism building. So we know investment got to be two-way, right? You can't just invest one way. It's not a one-way street. Otherwise, it's not sustainable. So talking about mechanism building, what kind of mechanisms or facilitations are you looking forward to in this regard?
I think first and foremost, both countries have to work with each other based on rule of law and the honor of contract and so on, and that trust. That is, two countries will work with each other not by good willings, not by good desires, but have both countries adhere to the agreement, to rule of laws together. That's the basic guarantees, and that's also guarantee for equal treatment and mutual beneficial. I think that's the foundation.
Right, and when talking about the dual track in terms of trade between China and Brazil, for instance, the industry, the supply chain in industry is a very typical example here, because Brazil apparently needs raw materials for its upgrading of the industrial sector development. And what do you think China can play a role in that?
I think that the two countries' economies are really compensate with each other, and Brazil's need investment, need infrastructure, need some support to upgrade the economy, and also need to increase the other capabilities like shipment and so on and so forth. But China also needs Brazilian support and help in that regard. For example, China needs kind of supply, kind of stable supply of agricultural products, raw materials and others. And China also benefit from Brazilian like aerospace industry and so on and so forth. And also Brazil can serve as a very good starting point, a stronghold for China, together with Brazilians, to expand to other areas of the entire Latin American continents, because Brazil can play an essential role, a central role in that regard. In other words, the cooperation between Brazilians and Chinese are not only good for China and Brazil, but also for the surrounding areas, both in Brazil and in China, because both countries are located in the very center of two very important continents.
We'll be getting back to you, gentlemen, for more discussions. Now, CGTN spoke to Brazilian Minister of Institutional Affairs, Alexandre Fidela, about the steps Brazil has taken to eradicate poverty.
It is fundamental. If we do not have the union of the G20 nations in the world to join the fight against poverty, in the reduction of inequality, and in the fight against hunger, we will not achieve this success. Brazil and China have a lot to share about this. Brazil, under President Lula's government, wants to end hunger in Brazil. Unfortunately, it had returned during the Bolsonaro government. In the first 2 years of President Lula's government, we have already lifted 20 million Brazilians out of hunger. We want to end the 4 years of President Lula's government with Brazil off the hunger map. China has also been making significant strides in recent decades to lift people out of absolute poverty and to end hunger in China. So Brazil and China have a lot to show the world on how to end hunger and reduce poverty worldwide.
So, Mr. Perez, what's your take on China-Brazil cooperation on poverty alleviation?
Well, one of the key agreements in terms of the G20 meeting a few days ago was the fact that you needed to make sure that students, kids who go to school, are well fed. And for example, an agreement that came out of the meeting was actually to provide the support of countries and also foundations to provide 300 million lunches for kids. That's dramatically important, because when you think about kids in these poor countries, I mean, you cannot be a successful student if you are not well fed. And that sometimes that happens at home. So if you have that guarantee that at school somebody's going to provide you with a hot food, definitely run lunch, it's going to be definitely very important for them to be concentrated in their studies. I think that's the type of key examples of particular situations that these countries can focus on and drive change.
Right, and Mr. Huang, actually China has a rich experience in terms of poverty alleviation. They just finished a massive campaign of poverty eradication in China and won the battle actually nationwide. What does it mean to countries, developing countries, major developing countries like Brazil? It's not going to be copy and paste because of, due to different cultural backgrounds, different social backgrounds.
Yes, I think every country has their own conditions and their own cultures and their own civilizational traditions. But if there is anything that China can share with other fellow developing countries about poverty alleviation, is 4 elements must be very critical. Number 1 is political stability. You have to have political stability. That's a foundation for all the things we want to achieve. A second, of course, is a fast development or sustainable development. The third one is a fair distribution. And because no matter how fast you develop, if the distribution has a problem, then the poor and the rich will not benefit the same. The rich can get richer and poor can poorer. Last but not the least is a very strong government capability or state capability to intervene with sustainable and consistent policies to make sure the problem will be solved, the task will be accomplished. So stability, sustainable development, distribution, and very good policies and strong policies to promote all this poverty alleviations. And I think that's like 4 key issues or experience China can share with other fellow developing countries.
And many of those developmental issues or foundational issues, as you just mentioned, Professor, requires financing, strong financing, sustainable financing, without political strings attached, actually. So the Global South has been exploring, charting new ways of financing. What do you make of China and Brazil's cooperation, joint efforts in this regard?
I think it's quite unfortunate that we're living in the world for the so-called US dollar dominance or US dollar hegemony. That's very important. So a very important problem for developing countries is that when they try to overcome the financial problems, sometimes they're subject to a kind of unfair policies of the United States or other developed countries, because they're the ones who dominate in this financial world. For example, in World Bank, in the Global Monetary Forum, so on and so forth, the developed countries do have a much larger weight of power in this. That is a structural problem. To overcome that, of course, first and foremost, the developing countries will have good and sound policies to promote development, generate on their own the capitals that are necessary for further development. Having said that, another important issue is that countries like Brazil and China should work with each other to try to help each other to solve this very critical issue called to finance economic development. That's why it is very encouraging for the BRICS countries began to discuss, to talk about how to establish a kind of financial system or payment system so that they can, on the one hand, overcome the financial challenges because of this kind of unequal distribution of financial power in the global community. On the other hand, they can only really reinforce their own capabilities and try to help each other to overcome this challenge. But still, this is a long time, very important and long-term challenges that all developing countries will have to work together to overcome.
But it's good to know that they've already have a good start, right? An institutional experiment test, if you will. That's the new development bank based in Shanghai, right? And former Brazilian President Dilma Rousseff is now the president of that bank, actually initiated by BRICS members, right?
Yeah. I think that's a very good starting point.
What's your take on this, Mr. Perez?
Well, I think those are very relevant efforts. If you think about the evolution of the world, we need to think about technology. And you cannot get ahead in this competitive world if you don't get a handle of technology. How people...
And even technology has a role to play in better financing for development.
Well, technology is going to help us to actually make payments efficient. If you want to transfer money from one country to another country, it's going to take 2 days, 3 days. Even now, with the advances of all these wonderful technologies, that's completely unsustainable. When the money can be transferred in seconds in China using WeChat Pay, how come we cannot replicate that type of model around the world to facilitate trade? So obviously, technology plays a very important role. Now, to be able to master that technology, we also need to be prepared for that. And for that, we need infrastructure from power, electricity, internet connection, 5G connectivity. That's something that everybody will need in our developing countries, because that's the only way for them to actually get a hold of these technologies and to be able to create opportunities for themselves. Once you get access to these technologies, you will be able to improve yourself.
Overcome the digital gap and the development gap.
Benign relationship between China and Brazil, between China and the Latin America at large, is actually affecting not only economy, not only socially, it also has impact culturally as well, because the Brazilian kids in primary school, they began to learn Chinese, and they began to say in Chinese, we have the best beef in the world, things like that, because the country is one of the largest beef exporter to China. That's the connection between trade and culture as well. But any development should happen, better happen in the mechanism like G20, like BRICS, like APEC, etc. But do you think the current framework of G20, of BRICS, actually can help especially developing countries to enlarge their voice, to have better chance of opportunities of development?
I think there's no other way around. Obviously, this year was actually the beginning of the participation of the African Union in the G20. And I think that's a very important development, because now you're incorporating the voices of many dozens of countries from Africa who before these particular meetings didn't have a voice to express. So obviously in the future, we will see also that, well, it's true they don't want to change the number G20 to G21 or 22. They will see that adding these important blocks in the global economy, it's actually of value, not only for the developing economies, but also for the whole world.
And talking about being sustainable, we have to pay attention to the world goal of reaching that. That is the UN SDG, UN Sustainable Development Goals 2030. Professor, I believe you'd be quite familiar to this, right? But the UN chief is not exactly optimistic about the process of realizing it by the year 2030. And to be honest, the clock is ticking right now. How can the Global South making their own efforts to at least make them not be left behind?
Yeah, the US goals in 2030 largely depend on how well or how fast the Global South countries or developing countries can achieve. And this clock is clicking, seems that it is a big challenge to accomplish that. Of course, you can blame others. You can have many reasons. For example, global political uncertainty, the wars, and also this kind of trade protectionism, and so on and so forth. But essentially, I think right now we should say that the Global South is playing more and more important role in global affairs and has stronger and stronger voice. I think essentially it's up to Global South countries themselves to work together to get this done.
Let's turn to Brasilia, where President Xi Jinping and his counterpart in Brazil, Lula da Silva, are signing the joint documents after their bilateral talks at Alvorada Palace, the President Lula da Silva's residence.
We're expecting the outcome of this crucial meeting, dubbed as the most important state visit to Brazil since the establishment of diplomatic ties between the two countries 50 years ago. This is live footage from Brasilia. Presidents of Brazil and China are now signing documents crucial to the further development of ties between the two countries, being the largest developing economies on the eastern and western hemisphere. Now,
they're presenting the documents they have signed after their bilateral talks.
And we're still waiting for the details of this document, but it's widely expected to be crucial for the two countries.
The ceremony is apparently witnessed by high-ranking officials both from Chinese government and the Brazilian government, signifying a broad range cooperation between the two governments. And this is actually President Xi Jinping's fifth visit to Brazil. And China and Brazil are the biggest developing countries in the eastern and western hemispheres. Both countries important emerging economies and comprehensive strategic partners. And in recent years, China and Brazil ties have been characterized by renewed vitality and significant achievements, including practical and also cultural cooperation.
Indeed, talking about renewal, now the two presidents are witnessing the signing of bilateral cooperation documents, as we believe. Another part of the outcomes of President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil. And on the left side of the screen is Mr. Zheng Shenjie, the Minister for NDRC, the National Reform and Development Commission of China, and he has signed a cooperational document with his Brazilian counterpart. And the two countries' presidents are witnessing this very moment. More cooperation documents are expected. This is happening in Brasilia, at the official residence of the President of Brazil.
And both presidents of China and Brazil are witnessing the signing of serious agreements.
They're expected to address the audience.
Right.
Distinguished President Xi, members of the Chinese delegation.
Dos seus ditados, Confúcio nos fala sobre a alegria de receber amigos,
as well as the colleagues from Brazil.
Que tenho ao receber o presidente Xi Jinping em visita de Estado e poder retribuir a hospitalidade em que Janja e eu desfrutamos em nossa visita a Pequim no ano passado. Nos reunimos nesta ocasião para
Last year, I paid a visit to China, and this year, with our invitation, President Xi paid his state visit to Brazil. This visit further strengthens the bilateral ties between China and Brazil. China and Brazil have a very solid and long-standing friendship. Although we are separated by the geographical distance, our friendship has always been firm.
Atingiu recorde histórico de 157 bilhões de dólares. O superávit com a China é responsável por mais da metade do saldo comercial global do Brasil.
Reached $157.6 billion. China is the largest trading partner of Brazil.
Vem participando de licitações de projetos de
Chinese
infraestrutura
enterprises
e tem sido parceira
came
em empreendimentos
to
como a
do
construção
their
de
businesses in
usinas
Brazil, establishing
hidrelétricas
sound
e
partnership with Brazil,
Isso
helping
representa
Brazilian
emprego,
enterprises to
renda,
develop
sustentabilidade
infrastructure
para o Brasil.
capabilities.
Indústrias brasileiras também estão
They have
ampliando sua
contributed
presença na
greatly
China,
to the
como a
sustainable
WEG,
development in
a
Brazil.
Suzano e a Randon. Ao mesmo tempo,
Brazilian
o agronegócio
enterprises have
continua a
also
garantir a
made their
segurança
presence in
alimentar
China.
chinesa. O Brasil é, desde 2017, o maior fornecedor de alimentos para a China. Nesse contexto,
Brazil
a BRF
is the largest food export destination.
na fábrica para processamento de carne na província de Henan, na China. A dimensão estratégica de nossa
Especially in
relação
terms of
é antiga.
meat export.
Há 40 anos, teve início
Brazil
o
has
projeto
made huge
satélite
contributions.
brasileiro de recursos terrestres, fundamental para que dominássemos tecnologias aeroespaciais.
In the past 50 years since the establishment of our diplomatic
Essa
ties,
foi, durante muito tempo, a maior parceria de cooperação
both sides
entre
have
países
reaped
do sul
sound
global.
fruits,
Esta visita de Estado reforça a
which
ambição
has been
e
closely
renova o
followed
pioneirismo
by the world at
do nosso
large.
relacionamento. O presidente Xi e eu decidimos elevar a parceria estratégica global ao patamar de comunidade de futuro
Together with
compartilhado
President Xi
por
Jinping, we
mundo
would
mais
work
justo e
together to
planeta
elevate our
sustentável.
relationship from
Estamos
strategic
determinados
partnership
a
to
alicerçar
comprehensive
nossa
strategic
cooperação
partnership.
pelos próximos 50 anos em áreas como infraestrutura sustentável,
On the occasion of the
transição
50th
energética,
anniversary of our
inteligência
diplomatic
artificial,
relationship,
economia digital,
we
saúde
hope
e aeroespacial.
that in the future,
Por essa razão,
in the fields of
estabelecemos
digital
sinergias
economy
entre as
and
estratégias
AI,
brasileiras de
we would
desenvolvimento,
conduct
como a
more
nova
cooperation
Indústria
with
Brasil, o
better
Programa de
achievements
Aceleração do
to be made.
Crescimento, o Programa Rota de Integração Sul-Americana e o Plano de Transformação Ecológica e a Iniciativa Cinturão e Rota. Para dar concretude às sinergias, uma força-tarefa sobre cooperação financeira
In particular, in
e
the field
outras
of
sobre
energy,
desenvolvimento produtivo e
we would
sustentável
continue such
serão
partnership.
estabelecidas
China and
e
Brazil
deverão
enjoy
apresentar
very big
projetos
space of
prioritários em até
partnership
2
in energy,
Queremos adensar a
as
cadeia
well
de
as
valor em nosso
in
território,
infrastructure
além de
investment
ampliar e
and
diversificar
energy
a
storage.
pauta com o maior parceiro comercial. No contexto dessa visita, quase 40 atos
China and
internacionais
Brazil
foram
are
assinados
very
em
important
áreas como comércio,
trading partners.
agricultura, indústria, investimentos, ciência e tecnologia,
I believe
comunicações,
that
saúde,
in the field of
energia,
economy and
cultura,
trade and
educação e
investment,
turismo. Vamos
cultural
realizar o
tourism
Ano Cultural
and
Brasil
media.
China em 2026
both
para
countries,
promover e aproximar nossa
with the
sociedade,
past achievements
ambas
made,
reconhecidas internacionalmente por sua
would
rica
continue
diversidade
on the
e
basis of our
criatividade.
strategic
No plano
partnership and
regional,
our long-standing
trabalharemos
friendship.
juntos para dar seguimento ao diálogo Mercosul-China e discutir o aprofundamento de cooperação na área de
And I
investimento.
also believe that in terms of South-South cooperation, China and Brazil would make
Mantemos
more
profícua
achievements.
coordenação na ONU, na OMC e em arranjos como o G20, o BRICS e o BASIC. Defendemos reforma da governança global e sistema internacional mais democrático, justo,
In terms of global
equitativo
governance,
e ambientalmente sustentável.
we both
Em
believe
mundo assolado por conflitos armados e tensões
in the
geopolíticas,
philosophies
China e
of
Brasil
equity
colocam a paz,
and reasonable
a
development.
diplomacia e o diálogo
To that end,
em primeiro
China
lugar.
and Brazil stand ready
Agradeci o
to make
engajamento no chamado
bigger efforts.
a ação pela reforma da governança global que o Brasil lançou no âmbito do G20. Os entendimentos comuns entre o Brasil e a China para uma resolução política para a crise na Ucrânia são exemplos da convergência de visões em matéria de
As to the
segurança
issue
internacional.
of Russia and Ukraine conflict, we would join hands together in order to make some new breakthroughs to solve that conflict. Our alliance means a lot.
A Aliança Global contra a Fome, lançada oficialmente há 2 dias, é uma das iniciativas mais importantes da presidência brasileira do G20. A China foi parceira de primeira hora nessa empreitada para devolver a dignidade aos 733
On the occasion
milhões
of
de pessoas
G20,
que
I
passam
advised
fome no mundo
joint
em
efforts
pleno século XXI.
to have a global alliance against hunger, and China was the first one country to respond to that call, and I was greatly
O
relieved.
interesse chinês pelo Fundo Florestas Tropicais para sempre, proposto pelo Brasil para remunerar
I
a
hope
preservação
that
desses biomas,
in the future,
confirma que há
China
alternativas
would always
eficazes para financiar o
embrace
desenvolvimento
us
sustentável.
as a friend from the
Senhoras
tropical area.
e senhores,
Ladies
estou
and gentlemen,
confiante que a parceria
I
que
am
o presidente
confident,
Xi e eu firmamos hoje excederá todas
especially
as expectativas
with
e para
China and Brazil
facilitará
partnership
o caminho para uma nova etapa
and
do relacionamento
joint
bilateral.
efforts in South-South
Espero
cooperation,
receber o presidente
global
Xi Jinping
governance,
no Brasil no ano
and
que
common
vem
development.
para a cúpula dos BRICS em julho e para a COP32.
And I hope that next
Estou
year,
ansioso
President
para
Xi
visitar a China novamente
would
por ocasião
come for the
do
BRICS
Fórum
Summit
China
in
Senado.
June
Muito obrigado.
to pay a repeated visit to Brazil. Thank you very
Neste
much.
momento, fará uso da palavra o presidente da República Popular da China, Xi Jinping.
Thank you. Next, please allow me to invite President of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, to speak. Your Excellency, President Lula da Silva, ministers, friends from the media, ladies and gentlemen, friends.
很高兴应卢拉总统邀请，
At the invitation of
在
President
中巴建
Lula,
交50周年
I'm very
这个
happy
具有重要历史意义
to come to
的
Brazil
年份
at this very meaningful
再
year
次
because this
对
year
巴西
we
进行
celebrate
国
the
事访问
50th anniversary of diplomatic ties.
这是我时隔5年再次踏上这
This
片
is my
充满
visit
爱和希望的土地。
to this land of love
启
in
程
5
前
years.
夕，我收到多封
Before my
巴
departure
西
to
各界
Brazil,
友好
I
人士的来
received
信，
many letters from the
信中
personage
洋
of
溢
Brazil.
着
In their
巴西
letters,
人民对
they
中巴友谊的
express
真
to
实
me their true love
和对深
about
化
the
两国
friendship
友好
between
的期
China
盼。
and Brazil and
令
their
我深
hope
受感
to
动。
further strengthen our friendship. Those
刚
letters
才
touch me very
我
deeply.
同卢拉总统
Just now,
举行了亲切友好、
I had
富有成果的
a very
会谈。
productive and also
我们共同
the
回顾
candid
中巴关系50年发展历程，
conversation. We
一
revealed
致认为
that the journey we traveled over the
两国
past
关
5
系正处于
decades.
历史
We
最好
all
时期，
believe that right now our relations at
日
the
益
best
彰显
times,
全球性、战略性、
showing
长远性影响，
its long-term strategic
成为发展中
influence
大
around the
国
world.
携手共进、
And we are
团结
all
合作的典范。
the major countries, and we set exemplary
我们就
examples
中巴关系
for
未来发
major
展
countries
达
hand
成
in
新
hand
的
forging
战略
ahead.
共识，
And we also
其中最重
came
要
up
的是，
to the strategic
我们
agreement.
共同决定将双
And we
边关
all
系
decided
提
to
升为
elevate
携手
our
构
bilateral
建
ties
更公正、世界和更可
to
持续
a
星球的
more
中
just
巴命运
world
共同
and a sustainable planet,
同时将共建一路倡议
and also would like to
巴西
create
发
the
展战略
synergy
对接，
between China's Belt and Road Initiative and Brazil's
在世界
strategic
格局
development
加
strategies.
速演变的背景下，
Against the backdrop
这
that the
体现了中巴
transformation
两个发展中大
of
国
the skill and scene
识变、
in a
应
century
变、
And also our cooperation also shows our decisive to adapt to the changes of the time and the landscape. And we also would like to increase the voice and representation of the global South. We all believe that we will continue to strengthen our political mutual trust for the issues that related to the core issues about our sovereignty, territorial integrity, and key interests. We will support each other to realize high-quality development. As the major developing countries in the East and West hemispheres, we will also support and drive development of the global South and also to steer the world order toward more equitable and just. We believe that we need to do a better job to connect our strategic development policies. We should also strengthen and deepen our cooperation in the fields such as the finance, trade, investment, infrastructure construction, environment. And we should also do a better job in cooperation in such fields as AI, grain mining, and also sustainable development. These are all the emerging sectors, and we should also redouble our efforts to produce practical results and to make a conducive effort to accelerate the development of our countries. We all believe that our two countries should further play a due role in the multilateral organizations such as G20 and United Nations, and we should also strengthen our cooperation against hunger and poverty, geopolitical disputes, climate changes, as well as cyber securities. And we should work together to deal with the challenges conventional and non-conventional fields and make a new contribution to the world's development and stability. Next year marks the 10th anniversary of China, the Latin America Summit. We would like to work with the Latin American countries, including Brazil, to bring our cooperation and our ties to new heights. Ladies and gentlemen, the world right now is not a tranquil one. We have seen the world suffered from the wars and fights. But we belong to the one planet. We are a community, and we should also champion the security vision, and that will help us to tear the way out toward stability. Regarding the Ukraine crisis, I have emphasized for many times, for the complex issues, there is no simple answer to it. China and Brazil work together, released the 6-point consensus on political settlement on the Ukraine crisis, and we also initiate Friends of Peace regarding the Ukraine crisis issues. We would like to gather more voices for peace and also to pave the way for political settlement for Ukraine crisis. In terms of the humanitarian crisis, the situation is even worsened in the Gaza places. And we also have seen that the spillover of this crisis. And we're quite worried about the situation there. Therefore, the international community should strengthen their efforts in this regard to deal with the disputes. And the root cause should be the Palestinian issues. We should first to cease the fire and to improve the humanitarian support assistance and to realize the two-state solutions in order to fight for the final solution to deal with these issues. China and Brazil all champion just, and we also show our responsibilities, fight for justice and fairness. China would like to work with Brazil to enrich the connotation of the era of the China-Brazil community with a shared future, and we would like to have that development, not poverty. We would like to see cooperation instead of confrontation. We would like to see that a strong voice conveyed, and we would like to have that cooperation and peace instead of confrontation and fights in order to create a better world. Thank you.
Chinese President Xi Jinping and Brazilian President Lula da Silva have just addressed the media at the Brazilian capital, Brasilia, after their bilateral meeting. And one of the biggest outcomes from this crucial meeting is China and Brazil have issued a joint statement on the building of a community of shared future that features a more just world and a more sustainable planet. The statement was signed after President Xi Jinping and President Lula da Silva attended a bilateral meeting in Brasilia. Now, for more insight, let's turn to our guests. So, Professor Huang, talking about this big achievement from President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil, the joint statement on building a China-Brazil community of a shared future that features a more just and a more sustainable planet. So, what's your take on this?
I think first and foremost, we see the two-country friendship is very much strengthened, the mutual trust, mutual understanding.
So this is definitely an elevation of bilateral ties.
Deepen. That's why we're going to build together a community of shared future, and which include work with each other to build up the economy for sustainable development. The second is that we see the two countries has much bigger and responsible way to deal with global issues. For example, both President Xi Jinping and President Lula mentioned about Ukraine crisis and the humanity disaster in Gaza. The two sides world to develop a just and a just world, and especially global South agenda. Last but not the least, the two countries also, state very clearly that they are going to work together to fight for the hunger, fight for poverty, and that, I think, is a very, very strong commitment. I think the two countries really do step up in all these areas, and which is very encouraging indeed.
What's your take on this, Mr. Perez?
Well, when you think about sustainable development, the strength of these efforts is definitely going to go stepping up. And when you think about that, it's already happening. For example, in the case of China, China is the biggest producer of electric vehicles today. They are exporting vehicles to all over the world. And that means a better world for all of us, the only planet that we all have. On the other hand, Brazil as well. Did you know that Brazil, 90% of the energy is renewable? How come is that?
That's
because
huge.
Brazil is actually committed to develop the resources from the Amazon. And the fact that you have the Amazon, you have 50% of this energy produced by this renewable source, which is incredible. It's part of the blessings that Brazil has received. So both countries are already working on building a more sustainable planet.
Right, and President Xi also mentioned that the two countries are moving are good examples of moving two major countries moving ahead, hand in hand, and they created synergy of Belt and Road, framework, and with Brazil's own development strategies. And talking about that, how can Brazil's leadership in MOCASA, the local development mechanism, with China's Belt and Road initiative, how do they create synergies that can benefit both sides?
I think that this first and foremost, both leaders, as we can say, come to a very deep mutual understanding that the Belt and Road Initiative is really, really an initiative for both countries to develop both countries' economy and to strive for sustainable development. And also they realize that Belt and Road Initiative, if two countries work together to build up this kind of Belt and Road and to realize Belt and Road Initiative, it will benefit not only Brazilians and the Chinese, but also the whole world, especially in the country around. And this is, I think, a very strong commitment, not just for the benefit of both countries, but for benefits of countries around the two countries, the entire world, the entire global south. I think that's a pretty clear, strong commitment, which is very inspirational.
And we talked about that the major outcome, major declaration of today's state visit is to establish a shared future, a community of shared future for both China and Brazil. And China and Brazil have already shared golden 50 years. So what do you think are the major priorities of the development of the next 50 years? Edgar?
Well, I would say poverty. Definitely, in the case of Brazil, for example, there's still work to be done. And I think when you think about moving forward, obviously we would like to see these numbers, poverty rates decrease, because that's the only way for the population actually to grow in progress. So I think in that case, the example from China is very relevant. That's something that already China has done. Well, as you mentioned before, it's not really easy copy and pasting process, but nonetheless, I think there are going to be many lessons that can be learned and taken advantage of by the Brazilian population.
Professor, let me follow up on that regional implication topic you just talked about. Actually, in his address to the media in Brasilia, as we just watched, President Xi Jinping also mentioned that next year, the year 2025, also marks the 10th anniversary of the official operation of the Forum on Cooperation between China and Latin America and the Caribbean countries. Tell us more. Let's put China-Brazil ties into that context. Tell us more about this.
I think that Brazil is one of the very important countries, a major power in Latin America. But Latin America is a very big piece of land. I think China has been working with Latin American countries, all of them. And that platform is China-Latin American Forum, and this is 10th anniversary. 10 years is a very long time, but it's also a very short time. It tells us how quick, how fast, and how deep this bilateral relationship between China and the Latin America developed. And this we say the two leaders speech is a very good demonstration that China and Brazil, an important Latin American country, work together. And this will, of course, expand to the rest of countries in Latin America, which means that this global village we live together is really very small. Even though, like I said, we have a geological distance, a huge Pacific, but that does not stop both sides to work with each other, to get closer to each other. So next year, I think, will be a big memorable point for Latin American countries and China to work together.
What memorable points, for example?
3 points. Number one, like I noticed that President Lula, when in his speech, he mentioned twice alliance. Alliance is a very strong word. Alliance on how to find a peaceful solution for Ukraine crisis and how to solve the humanitarian disaster.
I think by alliance, he probably means to make joint efforts as partners.
I think alliance means coalition partners, but it's a very strong word. That alliance must be based on not on mutual understanding, but on consensus. President Xi Jinping said a strategic consensus. So the two countries work in the same directions, make same effort on two issues. Number one, peace solution for Ukraine crisis.
Like
Number two, sustainable planet against hunger. I think this is a very strong commitment. I think that will be direction. I mean, especially on sustainable development, that will be the direction for China and Latin American countries next year when we mark the 10th anniversaries of the forum.
And also in President Lula Silva's address, he also mentioned that BRICS summit is coming up next year in Brazil, right?
Yes. I think the BRICS is hitting the jump point one by one, 10th anniversary, and then the BRICS summit will be hosted by Brazil. I think President Lula did very, very good job by putting all those together. I think Brazil will play a very central role in in the major global South countries together in Brazil to discuss major issues that they have shared interest and shared concern. I do expect that next year's summit in BRICS in Brazil will be a very successful one. We have a lot of substantial achievements.
Actually, that reminds me of a story I've heard about a Brazilian guy's experience in China. He took taxi, and the taxi driver asked him, where from? And he said, I'm from Brazil. And the driver said, oh, the BRICS countries, BRIC buddies. So, Edgar, do Latin American people see bilateral relations in that way? We are buddies.
Well, I think so. If you look at Brazilians, they are familiar with companies like Didi. They are familiar with companies like Kuaishou, or of course TikTok. So all these are developments from Chinese companies. So these Chinese companies are not only focused in the Chinese market, they are focused all over the world. And of course, they consider Brazil as a big market.
So when you are mentioning local people, do you mean that local people actually can feel tangible impacts or results of bilateral cooperation?
I would say so, because if you think about Brazilians, also a lot of people in Brazil are also from Asian origin. So not in the same proportion as in the case of my native Peru, but equally in Brazil, you will find a lot of people from either China or different other countries in Asia. So really, when you see companies from China coming to Brazil, let's say in the mining industry, in the agricultural industry, you will definitely have a connection there. So really, it can be considered parties.
I believe you ought to notice this, Mr. Perez, in his address. President Lula also mentioned some future directions for China-Brazil cooperation. He mentioned digital economy, artificial intelligence. So, being specific on this, you've been talking about common people's feelings. How can these, catchy words, avant-garde ideas be penetrated by bilateral cooperation into our daily lives?
When you talk about technology, we're not talking about technology for large companies. We're talking for people like you and me, because all of us will be able to use technology such as artificial intelligence. And when you want to use the best technologies, sometimes there's a big tag price there, and that might be very expensive. Considering that China is actually a very productive developer of these new technologies, the price actually is much convenient. So when you think the overall market, many of these technologies come from the Western world. Guess what? There is also a competitive approach that is coming from Chinese companies. And this approach can actually be more palatable for the global South, because they also need access to the most modern technologies, but it cannot be at impossible prices. That's something that China can be part of the solution for elevating the quality of life of our Latin American population.
Are you as confident as Mr. Perez here, Professor Huang?
Yes, I think that people see what's happening in the daily life. Brazilians, for example, they know for example, a Brazilian farmer knows that his products is sold to China because the Chinese company buys it. Beef makers in Brazil know that beef goes to China. When they also, the cooperation with China, make a lot of expensive products more affordable, like phones, cars, and so on and so forth. And I was told by my Brazilian friends that Chinese cars much cheaper and more reliable, is better for BND. It's only 1/3 of price for usually the American cars, but it's very good. And cell phone also. I think the cooperation between Brazil and China make the products, the goods consumed by both Chinese and Brazilians more affordable and more available. For example, when we Chinese have the best beefs on earth from Brazilians, it's not very expensive, right? It's usually if you export a beef from Japan, that is really, really expensive. But now Brazilian beef is not that is as good as a Japanese beef to some extent, but everybody can afford it. And also the products, the fruit, and all of them from Brazilians is really, really benefit ordinary people. They can see it in their own lives. Of course, bodies come from there. It's not by somebody's teaching or propaganda, so on and so forth. It's by what's happening around them in their own lives. Of course, they say it from the bottom of their heart that we are BRIC bodies. And I do think that's a very good way of development, a mutual relationship or bilateral relationship.
And President Lula da Silva actually mentioned just now a lot of keywords. The most keywords I heard is energy, about energy and energy transition, green transition as well. How dire is the need for green technology and green transition in Latin America?
Well, absolutely, there's a great need. Brazil is an exception because they have access to the largest river out there, which is the Amazon, which actually starts in Peru, in the highlands there of Peru. But on the other hand, you have also other countries that actually need help there. So obviously technology coming from both Brazil and China, in the example of the EV technology, that is going to be key for them to rely now on renewable, sustainable sources in the future.
So how can collaboration on energy and energy transition between China and Brazil, two major economies in the global south, how can that pattern ensure a more balanced, more guaranteed and short way of a global energy transition?
Well, that's not going to happen in one day. But nonetheless, if you go to any particular country in South America, you will see that all of them already have plans. For example, hydropower plants, projects for that. That's infrastructure that needs to be built. And to be able to build this infrastructure, you need financing. That's where China and Brazil can help. Because obviously they are leading countries in different organisms, like for example, banks that can actually provide financing for these initiatives, or different initiatives through China or through Brazil. So those are going to be a key way for these countries to actually be able to execute these projects that might be identified a long time ago, yet for lack of financing, those are not completed.
Well, now, following on this going green topic, I noticed that Chinese President Xi Jinping also mentioned cooperation on green mining. Why this is so important for bilateral ties this time?
Our countries are definitely relying on mining. If you look at countries like Peru, Chile, Bolivia, they are definitely strong exporter of copper, silver, and so on, even lithium. Lithium is a material that is very important for batteries in the electric vehicle industry. So when you think about green mining, you want to make sure also that in the same way that you are developing these resources, that you're using these resources to export to other markets, you are making sure that everybody's benefits. So not only the companies that are operating these entities, but also the overall population. So that's what we mean by a transition that is going to be sustainable for the whole country.
So it's also about environmental protection and ecological conservation, things like that. So in this larger regard, Professor Huang, how can China and Brazil work on this together? Because China has made massive promises on going green and going carbon peaking and then carbon neutral. And Brazil has similar programs like this, and it's been doing quite great in this regard. As Mr. Press just mentioned, large portion of Brazil's energy structure is green.
First, China itself has gone through a process in which has turned China into a very polluted countries, environmental, very unfriendly kind of industry or economy into a environment-friendly country. China has been quite successful in doing that. We all know that just 10 years ago, Beijing is all marked, but now we see blue skies all the time. I think this kind of experience, this kind of successful experience can be shared with Brazilians. And we know that the mining, talking about mining, usually in the past we called it destructive mining. That is, get the mine out, leave the entire devastated and or even destructive, cutting the woods and so on and so forth. Basically, take whatever is useful for me and leave the land devastated. I think what China and Brazil want to talk together is called constructive mining. That is, yes, we do want to make good use of these mines, but after that, we'll rebuild, restore a kind of environment as it is, or even better, called constructive. Through mining, not only we, provide a very important resources for development, but also doing that, we also rebuild a kind of environment more friendly and better. I think that's what really green mining is. I think China and Brazilians can work together.
A lot of achievements made in the past 50 years, and a lot more potential and opportunities awaiting us in terms of the next, as what President Xi said, next golden 50 years coming ahead.
And together in a community of a shared future.
Of a shared future and elevation, very importantly, elevation from strategic partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. It's a major achievement made by this state visit. All right, thank you very much, gentlemen, for all your inputs. And I'm Li Dongning in Beijing. Thanks for watching our special coverage of President Xi Jinping's state visit to Brazil.
I'm Pan Zheng. Stay tuned on CGTN.